Whereabouts did you grow up, and how did you how did you come over to get into the leadership stuff? Like, I'm guessing there was a big gap in between.
Yeah, well, I was born in Guyana, South America, and so spent the first 5 years there, came and emigrated to Canada with my family. I will say I was always into leadership, meaning, I stood out, I would say. I was captains of teams, but there wasn't any formal leadership process that happened. Really what happened is I matriculated through those different leadership spots. It was as an outcome of my failures that I started over. And then I got involved in a very small university that had a strong leadership program and really good role models and mentors that put me under their wing and intentionally developed me to be a leader.
So what was your childhood like? So you grew up in Guyana, okay. So
Yeah.
standard childhood or?
Well, if you know Guyana, so Guyana is the tippy top corner of South America, right beside Brazil. So in today's world, you would call it an emerging country. Back then, you would call it a third world country, meaning, there was no, it was one of those typical Commonwealth countries that was colonialized. And so a lot of the power and influence was held with the whites. And so you had the blacks and the Indians, or what we call now Southeast Asians, in differing positions. And so my area and my childhood, as best I can remember it, was not one of high affluence. And so my parents left. Typical immigrant story. When I was born, they left and went away to start over and left us to be raised with our grandparents. And so the first time I can remember meeting my parents, they left literally when I was 2 months old, was when I was 5. And so we came to Canada. Now imagine coming to Canada and you don't really have a grasp of the English. In the Caribbean, you speak what's called patois, pidgin English, a combination of Dutch, French, English, Creole, Portuguese, all kind of mishmashed together. And so I stood out like a sore thumb in Canada. I remember getting in lots of fights, not because, everybody was, I will say, out to get me, but, I was different than everybody else. I grew up in a predominantly white area. And so my parents were first generation. So where everybody had a sports car waiting for them at 16 years old and fancy jeans and all this, Club Med, all-inclusive vacations, you're trying to keep up with that, but you're working behind the scenes to have your pair of jeans. You're working behind the scenes to do all these things. So I'll say my childhood was, if you were to combine it in one sentence, it was about hard work, trying to fit in, and trying to get ahead.
So then you're in Canada. How did you get into soccer? It was a soccer scholarship?
Yeah.
Did you get into it straight away?
No. So, one of the sports I could play, I had 2 that I was good at, soccer and track and field, all done through high school. Back then clubs were the way to go, but my parents didn't have the money for clubs. So my dad coached me in soccer, and a high school coach who was a really great role model to me, Gary Boguski and Mike Shavalovich, coached me in track and field. And so I became really good at those 2 sports. And I was the kind of guy that would get a ball on the wall and play by myself. But the school, my parents aren't, they're immigrants. They've made sacrifices. You're not going to go away to university and do sports. Are you crazy? That's a waste of your time. And so I could not go and pursue that avenue, even though I was athlete of the year in my high school. I was winning medals. I was ranked in Canada, all these sorts of things. So I went away to a traditional university and I failed miserably. I'm talking just too much freedom, not enough discipline, not enough structure, and I just bombed. And one of the reasons I failed out is something I speak about in different talks, which was I didn't have the right role models and representation. That's somebody that took me under their wing and looked out for me. Nobody that looked like me and acted like me and said, "Hey, young man, you've got a lot of potential. Let's take care of you." Anyway, left to my own devices, when I failed out, I was so ashamed and so humiliated. I didn't want to let my parents know, "Thank you for your sacrifices, but I wasted it." And so I needed to start over. And I called up a track coach and a soccer coach that I knew that had recruited me. And I said, "Hey, I know it's been a year. I would like to come to your university now, if you're willing to still have me." And they said, "Happily to have you." And so I went over to Grayson University in Iowa, small university, loved it, and became a soccer track athlete and did school.
So, and performed really well there, I'm guessing.
You know what? Everybody has a right fit. And this is an important piece for your readers to know out there. I was lost in that big school. I needed a small school where my class sizes were 16, 20, 25. Some of them were as small as 5 or 6, where I felt like I mattered and I belonged. If I wasn't in class, a professor would say, hey, where were you? If I wanted to participate in a play, I could still participate in a play. In that small school, I mattered, I belonged, meaning I made a difference. There was opportunities for me to shine, and I wasn't just a number. And because of that, I got involved in other things. And the thing that really changed my trajectory and helped start me on this career as a vice president of student affairs is I became what was known as a house president. You might call them dons or proctors, the person on the floor who looks after all the other people on the floor. And that exposed me to a whole bunch of different leadership opportunities that opened my eyes to a whole new career that I didn't even know was possible.
We talk like you train a lot of leaders. What is we could talk, I guess, for hours on leadership. But what's like the key? Like, what's the keys to it? Like, is there a simple way of looking at it, like what people need, what people require? And is there something that you just have to have naturally, or can we all develop that skill?
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert here, but I will say that from my training, there's certain things that I've noticed. Number one is everybody needs to feel like they matter and they belong. So you're going to hear that a lot from me. And that's about the power of cohesion, connection, however you want to say it. In the corporate world, they would call it engaged. If people feel like they matter and they belong, they're more likely to want to perform for you as a leader. So how do you make that happen? How do you create an environment where there's a closeness, there's a cohesion, where you know that Sally's grandma is sick, or you know if Bob shows up with 2 coffees in the morning, he's had a rough day? How are you going to spend time to create meaningful connections between your workers? And so you have to develop that in order to grow and build loyalty and make people want to do things beyond the scale of their job description. All right, so great leaders have that ability. Number 2, feedback, 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 right? Great leaders give feedback. People crave it, they yearn for it, they want it. And they don't want just warm, positive feedback. They want the critical feedback, but they want it genuine and authentic. Don't give them warm feedback if it's not really meaningful. I say it like this: the guy that shoots on goal, great shot, but it was wide and 10 yards over. You don't really mean any of that, right? So don't say great shot when it goes 5 yards wide and 10 yards high. Save it for when it really means something. Then they will know that your feedback is genuine. Okay. Third piece that you have to really be able to do is communicate. And this is different than feedback, which is different than cohesion. What I mean by that is, are you clear in your communication? Are you articulate? Are you able to set a clear mission and vision through the way you communicate? And recognize that in order to communicate, it has to be proactive. You have to be out in the spaces, sending out whatever those key messages are. We think about messaging only as one time, but I usually try and give the same message 3 to 6 times, because communication, check what tell me what you just heard. Are we clear on the same message here? Those are my 3 things, right? And, and I connect communication to that clear mission and vision. It's kind of all one.